Hello and welcome again to the second foreign policy panel today. We started the day speaking about China and Europe and the US and how we can or cannot live without one another. We're zooming in a little bit now on the region. We're looking at the Black Sea and the region that is immediately contiguous to Romania. And we have a very interesting panel composition today. Although not necessarily your usual one. We have first and foremost Ambassador Roelof Sanders van Ace, who is going to help provide the perspective from the Netherlands. An actor that hasn't necessarily had the Black Sea at the core of its strategic preoccupations, but that is increasingly interested in the way that the entire strategic and security environment in Europe and around European borders is evolving. We have also with me here Colonel Constantin Spînu, who is head of, is it head of strategic communications? Public affairs in the Romanian Ministry of Defense. And I think, you know, as by now a regular guest of the festival, I think one of the first questions that I'm going to ask you is what is different this year as opposed to the past one. As you can see, a lot is different around us here. We have a social distancing panel, a panel with a smaller audience that sits nicely apart following security measures. And we also have one online participant, which is becoming the norm these days everywhere. But that allows us to bring Julia with us from Washington. Dr. Joja is with the Middle East Institute, and she specializes on the Black Sea region, and she's been studying it now for a number of years from Bucharest, from Berlin, from Washington now. And I wonder, Julia, if you've seen a different perspective from all of these places in turn. But before we jump into the discussion, I'm going to start by asking the ambassador to walk us through the perspective coming from the Netherlands as to what is important to the Netherlands about this region. We already know that you're very present, your country has traditionally been very present in this region. What do things look like now?
Thank you very much, dear Director Mrs. Popescu, dear panel members, dear audience. Thank you for inviting me to give a brief introduction on European security at this year's Râșnov Film and History Festival. I have to say that I admire the drive and creativity of the organizers to make the festival happen despite COVID-19, while fully respecting the public health requirements of the pandemic. As our host pointed out, we sit safely apart. When foreign diplomats address a rather sensitive theme, such as European security, in a public setting, the so-called Chatham House rule tends to apply. This means that it is agreed that the speaker will not be quoted.
Can you hold up the microphone?
As this was understandably not agreed for this event, I hope that you will forgive me for approaching the European security theme in a relatively high-level way, leaving the perhaps politically most sensitive viewpoints to the esteemed panel members. Before addressing today's topic, I should like to say a few words on the Dutch-Romanian bilateral relationship. This year, our two countries are celebrating no fewer than 140 years of official bilateral relations. As was customary in that era, our diplomatic relationship was established through personal correspondence between King Karel I and King William III of the Netherlands in January 1880. We still have their letters. And if it had not been for COVID-19, a small exhibition of our diplomatic history would have toured both countries this year. While this year, 1880, marks the start of Dutch-Romanian official bilateral relations. The first Dutch government representatives were already here in the 1840s, in the coastal area of Romania, where most of the trade took place in that area, to a large extent with the Ottoman Empire. We, at the Dutch Embassy and the Netherlands-Romanian Chamber of Commerce in Bucharest, also aim to further develop the already impressive bilateral trade and investment by seeking new opportunities together with our Romanian counterparts. Dutch companies in Romania have long since benefited from the Romanian commercial potential, and since the early 1990s have in return become strong contributors to Romanian employment, economic growth, innovation, and Romania's service sector. It is also important to note that over 5,000 Romanian nationals work in the Netherlands, profiting from our open economy and demand for high-tech and manual labor skills. They make a vital contribution to our economy. Despite the constructive professional bilateral police cooperation, combating human trafficking is an area where, frankly, we can do better. For example, by improving policies on prevention and victim support. We are currently working on this. Bilateral defense cooperation is another key area for us. Cognizant of the importance of the defense of NATO's eastern flank, the Netherlands has recently committed to the Romanian government to participate every year until the year 2023 in military exercises in Romania and in the region, including with an engineer battalion in Romania this year, of course, COVID permitting. In defense of the same eastern flank, the Netherlands has been contributing around 270 military personnel to a multinational NATO battle group in Lithuania. This as part of NATO's so-called enhanced forward presence. Apart from military exercises in and around Romania, in the security domain, there is also room to work more closely together in NATO and the EU at large. NATO, after all, is the cornerstone of our collective defense policy. The alliance is the only military security organization comprising major Western democracies. The corona pandemic underlines the importance of working together better and has shown us how vulnerable we are when we try to confront a global challenge like this on our own, by which I mean to say as individual nations. If there is anything that Romanian counterparts I spoke with have persistently made clear to me over the last months, it is that, and I express myself as diplomatic as I can, it is that tranquility and security do not come from the East. Like Romania, and this may come as a surprise to you, the Netherlands, while geographically on the other side of Europe, is just as acutely aware of this as Romania is. We, after all, were faced with the downing of flight MH17 over East Ukraine, in which 193 Dutch nationals and 1 Canadian Romanian national lost their lives. You will also be aware of the more recent cyber attack on the OPCW, the International Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, based in my hometown, The Hague. As the title of today's event suggests, threats also emanate from other regions around Europe. Realities before COVID-19 may not be the foremost in your mind at this stage, but also on the southern borders of our continent, Fukuyama's optimistic prediction of the end of history turned out to be premature. Think of the civil war in Syria and the subsequent massive migration affecting Europe. Think of the continuing unrest in Northern Africa. And in today's multipolar world, threats are, and I underline this, of a hybrid nature. As I mentioned, digital hacks are part of it, but also hypersonic rockets. This further complicates our challenge. Perhaps a word on EU-NATO cooperation. When it comes to understanding that NATO is the indispensable alliance and that there is no alternative, our countries are very much on the same page. The Netherlands, Romania, Europe we can't at this stage guarantee our own security. The President of the European Commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, formulated it pointedly last year. We will stay transatlantic and we have to become more European. There is more we can do when it comes to cooperation between the EU and NATO. An important example is improving military mobility in Europe, an area in which Romania and the Netherlands have joined forces in the framework of the EU's so-called Permanent Structured Cooperation, better known as its abbreviation PESCO. In crisis situations, we need our forces, both European and American, to be able to move sufficiently fast across Europe. There is clearly room for improvement here. On a more fundamental note, perhaps, my government is of the opinion that Europe can and must do more to safeguard its own security in close cooperation with NATO. But there is more than only the military aspect of the alliance. Military capability can never be a goal in itself. It was devised as an instrument to achieve a peaceful, prosperous and stable Europe in close cooperation with the United States of America. This year in the Netherlands we remember the end of the Second World War 75 years ago. Romania last year commemorated 30 years since the revolution of '89. We think of the underlying values of freedom, of democracy and of rule of law, and how we expected that these values are so obvious that other countries would also adopt them. We thought it was essentially a matter of sufficient economic development, the development of a broad middle class and political awareness. By now, we've come to realize that this assumption was perhaps too optimistic. There are countries in the world which look at the world through a very different lens when it comes to democracy and human rights, but also on something more mundane as, and I do not hasten to add this, intellectual property rights. Let me end my introduction on the importance of multilateralism, a key foreign policy theme of the Dutch government. In our view, everything that we've built since 1945 and 1989 depends on effective multilateral international cooperation. In our view, countries like the Netherlands and Romania can't overstate the importance of a multilateral order in which not the power of the strongest is decisive, but the interests of the global community and the rights and obligations under international law. I am, of course, talking about the United Nations. But the EU and NATO are important pillars of the multilateral international order as well. So when I express the wish to work more closely with the Romanian multilateral fora, I mean that we join efforts to support the global multilateral order, to work together to modernize and improve this vital system, which so clearly benefits us, provided it is allowed to function properly. In summary, Romania and the Netherlands have a lot in common in the security area, and there is ample opportunity for intensified cooperation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Ambassador. If I may, I will just sum up a few things that you've said that I hope I heard right and that I think are very interesting. One, and this is you know, sort of the advantage of playing on home ground. I remember a few years ago when I saw statistics coming from the Netherlands, and they were obviously done in the Netherlands, that were showing, surprisingly perhaps for Romania, that the Romanian citizens in the Netherlands were not just doing you know, handiwork as we were used to thinking about our compatriots abroad perhaps, but actually they were present and making a very significant contribution to overall economic growth in very high-end value-added sectors, from engineering to high-tech and so on and so forth, which was a very pleasant surprise, and thank you for mentioning this. I think it's something that's worth noting and knowing by more people. I think you've mentioned a few things where Romanian and Dutch interests probably very much overlap. One, the strong transatlantic dimension and how we look at our security, not just from the prism of European cooperation, but also in very tight and inevitable connection with NATO. The other one is the type of dangers coming from the east, and I would say, you know, it's very good that you've mentioned that there are countries in the world that don't necessarily share our values. I think, and I'd be happy to discuss this further with Julia and with Colonel Spînu also, because you also deal with strategic communications. Unfortunately, we see in our own societies that values that we thought were deeply embedded are not necessarily, and that they need to be nurtured in order to continue being shared. And I think the pandemic has shown that more than anything. Other than that, well, you know, Fukuyama in the meantime changed his mind too, so he acknowledged his own shortcomings. And the fact that we cannot guarantee our own security is probably one of the most serious challenges that we need to deal with. And again, as this morning we discussed China, I think the issue of multilateralism is one of those not new, but somehow you know, resurgent topics that everybody discusses without really anybody making a very giving a very clear indication of how we're going to do this together. But anyway, today's debate is not so much about necessarily finding all the answers, but at least about asking the right questions. So thank you very much for giving us something to think about. And now that I know the ambassador wants to go sit with the audience, to be watching us closely as we debate. I'm going to turn to you, Julia, because I think you have the greatest freedom of today's guests to make an assessment of, perhaps, as I was saying earlier to Colonel Spînu, what is different this year as compared to last year? What has changed, would you say, in Romania's and the region's strategic position, if anything? I mean, you know, I wonder if these are things that perhaps the pandemic is just helping us see better, and they've always been there, or are things really changing fast within the space of 1 year?
Thank you, Oana, for your question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thank you for the invitation. I am thrilled to be here. It's my third year this time, and despite the corona pandemic, I can be, which makes me unable to be in Romania at this time, I can still be in Râșnov thanks to Zoom and other online habits that we got into. So particularly excited to be here today. Thanks for having me. With regards to your question, you know, it's hard. It's a good question, but it's hard to answer that. I think the pandemic has changed. I don't know about the festival because, you know, I'm here just for a few minutes, and I can see from the images that you posted online that you're observant of social distancing, so that's fantastic. And I'm envious I cannot be there. When it comes to the region specifically and into international politics, of course, a lot has changed with the coronavirus. It has changed our habit of living as well as our international relations. But when it comes to our region particularly, I think the Black Sea is just what it was a few years ago. But I think in Romania, we need to we are passionate about the Black Sea, hence we have this panel today. We always love to talk about it. But we do have this tendency to see the Black Sea from Romania, from Bucharest. But if you imagine or look on on Google Maps, and you look at Bucharest, and you zoom out, by the time you'll see all of Romania, you'll also see Timișoara, and then you'll see Istanbul, and then you'll see Turkey. And then coming back to our panel discussion, you will see the connection, the geographical connection really between the Middle East and the Black Sea and Europe and Asia and the Mediterranean. Because when you think about it, and that's something that we have a tendency not to do, the Black Sea is where Europe, Asia, and the Middle East meet. So Istanbul is 1 hour flight away from Bucharest, and that's where the Middle East is. That's where the Eastern Mediterranean starts. But I think with the limited resources and the limited political willingness that we have in smaller countries like Romania to punch above our weight and look at the region beyond that, we tend to see it only from one perspective. So when it comes to explaining the Black Sea, what my job is right now, the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean to U.S. policymakers, that's how I go about it. They look at it from the Washington perspective, where the Black Sea is cut into two between Europe and Asia and some of the Middle East. But in reality, these links, these geographical links, are far closer than we actually imagine, and that we are used to think about in strategic ways. So, as our priority in Romania and in the EU generally is to bring to keep the United States in, the way we can think about the region and have to sort of change our narrative about the region is that we are next to the Middle East and we are next to Asia, and the Black Sea is one of the most continues to be, back to your question if something has changed, continues to be one of the most volatile regions in the world, with all frozen conflicts around the Black Sea, some of them reigniting, with war ongoing on the shores in the north, but also a few hundred kilometers away from the southern shores in Syria, with now conflicts in the Eastern Mediterranean, again, just an hour flight away from Bucharest. So if we think about the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean in these terms, both on both sides of the Atlantic, we can perhaps do better in changing our perspective on the region and increasing our deterrence to threats that come from the East, as was discussed a bit earlier, but also from Iran and from China and from other sources. That's what I do right now in Washington, looking at the Black Sea from different angles and trying to explain that to U.S. policymakers to increase the Western presence on the shore. And that's maybe a way to look at it, even if you are in the middle of the region.
Thank you very much, Julia. And I think what you've mentioned is very very interesting and reminds me of something that for a while we haven't really been discussing so much. I remember, I don't know if you also do, Colonel Spînu. I think in the 2000s, there was this paper basically by Ron Asmus and Bruce Jackson, The Frontiers of Freedom, and it was the time when Samuel Huntington's divisive line was crossing right through our region, and then the discussion was that Romania was part of the wider Middle East, and the wider Middle East was something that was overlapping to some extent with the wider Black Sea region, and everything was wide. Everything was, at the time, we were trying to understand where one thing ends and another begins, one strategic area of interest. And I think if we look at it from the perspective of Washington decision makers, and I think we very much do in Romania, because we value so much the strategic partnership with the US, so that's probably our primary source of perspective on the region, then indeed, again, with the refugee crisis, with the Middle East again, as unstable as can be. While for a few years, I think we focused very much on Ukraine and on Russia and on territorial defense, I think we're being forced now to again look at ourselves and look at the Black Sea in the context of the wider region with more players and more dangers than just the very immediate contiguous ones. Would you be able to tell us not perhaps in very technical terms, but rather in terms of how we look at things, what does it feel like from the side of the Romanian defense to be preparing for that? Are we taking everything into account? Do we have everything that we need? And especially, do we have the structures, NATO with its current development strategy, European strategic autonomy, the US presence in the region? Do we feel safe and that we are well prepared to deal with all these threats?
Well, first of all, let me add up a little bit to what His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, just said about the NATO's and European Union strategic interest in the Black Sea region, and what our the esteemed colleague from Washington has also very correctly noticed, that is a matter of perspective. It looks like nothing has changed really in the last 2, 3, 4 decades. It's just that we use different lenses. Mm-hmm. So the reality is the same. The threats and the challenges in the security environment are pretty much the same, a mix of conventional and non-conventional threats. And now we have this pandemic, which has not stopped everything. It's just added a layer to this already very crowded and complicated image that we have when we speak about this security environment in the Black Sea region and in the extended area of the Black Sea. If we connect Mediterranean and the Middle East, we have a very wide picture with many layers that combine and overlap. So in terms of analysis, it depends which angle you want to take. But if we look from a security perspective, I would say that Romania has advocated for years the strategic role of the Black Sea region. It is not a matter of being wrong or right, but we have to see that after 2014, when the illegal annexation of Crimea that was done by the Russian Federation put a different lens on this region. And it was not all of the sudden, but it became very obvious that the strategic interest, not only of the alliance, but of the European Union should be focused also on the Black Sea region. Are we prepared? Do we feel safe enough? That's also questionable. You never can say you have done everything, you have covered every angle, you have taken into consideration every corner. But there's a continuous evolution, not only from a national perspective, but also from an allied perspective. If we speak about, as Mr. Ambassador said, the NATO posture on this region, on the eastern flank of the alliance, we see a very much aligned position of all NATO members, because in the recent years, NATO has 3 fundamental task corps, and in time, those 3 of them, collective defense, crisis management, and security cooperation, they have started to take a different role and different lead. And now it looks like we are going back to security, to collective security. From being an expeditionary alliance, we are taking our troops back home if you want to look into it like this. So we are thinking very seriously about our posture, our deterrence policy, and yes, on the eastern flank there is a unity in vision and a unity in action. We see from the Baltics through the southern part of the eastern flank that the allies are taking care of all these aspects of the threats and challenges that NATO as an alliance has to face off.
What about the ambassador's very clear formulation that in Europe we cannot guarantee our own security? We have to do this in cooperation with the United States. That's it's always been like that. It's what we are defending, at least in Romania and within NATO. But at the same time, there is growing discussion within Europe of European strategic autonomy. There is pressure from the Trump administration to increase our own capacities. There's growing fear in Europe that we don't really understand which way the United States are going and to what extent we can be dependent on the US. Romania has repeatedly been saying that there's just one thing that needs to be crystal clear about European strategic autonomy, and that is that it should not undermine NATO. But beyond that, have we moved past this, and have we added anything in terms of Romania's posturing toward European strategic collective defense? Where do we stand? Do we know what we want from this emerging construct?
It is crystal clear from our point of view. From the very beginning, the national security of Romania was founded on three pillars: being member of NATO, being member of the European Union, and also the transatlantic link. 2020 is the 140 years of diplomatic relations between Romania and the United States, and I think we have counted the 23rd year since we have signed a strategic partnership with the U.S. In all these years, 23 years of strategic partnership, we have seen a relationship growing not only at diplomatical or political level, but also at military level. We have progressed a lot. We have seen an increasing involvement of the U.S. military in the Black Sea region, and particularly in Romania. We have every year more and more exercises that allows us to integrate better, to become more interoperable, and to be better prepared and equipped for the challenges that lie ahead of us. So in my opinion, there's no dichotomy, there's no exclusion from one part to another. We can progress on the European side with the security and defense, and we can also have a very strong link with the other part of the Atlantic, which was the fundamental principle of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization from the very beginning.
Julia, last year when you were in Germany and you were looking at European strategic autonomy while it was still work in progress, especially on the German side, and I've no doubt that you're also following it from Washington. There is so much talk about the unpredictability of where the Trump administration or perhaps any next administration, whether it's still Trump or Biden, so which way it's going, and how much we can rely on Washington. There's a lot of discussion about NATO and how Turkey's unpredictability is influencing how much we can rely within NATO on all of our allies. At the same time, we see things happening. We see the UK leaving the European Union. We see other countries, France, increasingly developing an interest, including for the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. We see Germany reluctantly trying to be a more active player. What do you make of this? How in the next few years should we expect that we're actually going to see pretty much more of the same, meaning it's still going to be the United States that are going to be our main provider of security, and Europe will continue to sort of try to develop complementary structures, but nothing very ambitious? Or do you think that we are witnessing some sort of structural change?
Well, that's a lot of questions. So I'll try to answer some of them. I don't think I can answer all of them at the same time. It depends, again, going back to what I was saying and my colleague, Mr. Spînu, was saying, it depends on the perspective. If we are to look from the Romanian perspective, which we have right now with this panel, and we are to look at the Black Sea, we will see two things. We will see the presence of the United States and the absence of other Western allies, mostly. We still perceive in Romania the United States as our security guarantee. But one of the reasons why we do this, and I think there is no contradiction here between the capacity of strategic autonomy and the defense of Europe, is that if we are to look at European security, and every time I'm in Brussels, I ask the same thing, the same question to my colleagues over there. How come that Europeans feel less safe every year, and yet European security is not about Europe? If we are to look at strategic autonomy and initiatives, if we are to look at EU missions all over the world, this is how I explain. I teach European security here in the United States, and when my students ask me what European security is for Europeans, I really have trouble answering that, because most missions that are EU and military are not taking place in Europe. And with the European Intervention Initiative, apropos France, we will see that the focus of European security is to the south and to other continents, but not Europe, not the Black Sea. So from this perspective, if we are to look from Romania, we do rely on the United States. And then spinning the perspective around and looking from Washington, I would say that in a few years, it very much depends on what the Black Sea is able to do in terms of regional support for its own security, because it's not necessarily a matter of Trump unpredictability and what's going to happen with the next term, whether it will be a Republican or a Democrat one, but it's a matter of looking at the Black Sea in terms of tendencies, and we'll see that investment and interest, you mentioned earlier 2008, investment and interest of the United States for the Black Sea security has been increasing steadily from the end of the Cold War, and then with some tendencies of the European Reassurance Initiative that makes all the difference in terms of Eastern European security. That's something that was created during the Obama years, but was multiplied by 6 times during the first years of the Trump administration. So you see China, a pivot to Asia in the next years, I would say, that is going to be continuous, because the main threat perception of the United States comes from China, and involuntarily you will see less of an interest of the United States for this region, unless we frame the Black Sea in terms of other threats, in terms of how aggressive Russia continues to be. We'll see in the next few years in terms of how much China will be present in the Black Sea. So to me, it's not a matter of European strategic autonomy or European security versus transatlantic security. Transatlantic security means the United States and nothing else. And European security so far means that we have, within PESCO or other strategic autonomy initiatives, we have budgets of a few hundred million for the next few years, maybe 1 billion if we're lucky and it doesn't get cut, for research and development in terms of defense within the European Union. And then compare that number that is not present in Eastern Europe in terms of capabilities with 6.5 billion US dollars. That's what the United States has invested in its highest year in the European Reassurance Initiative, and that means the eastern flank. So for Romania, for the Black Sea, it will mean, just to wrap up, that it will depend very much on keeping the United States in for Black Sea security and increasing regional cooperation, because we tend to think about the Black Sea in terms of Romania, Turkey, and Bulgaria, with Turkey an increasingly unpredictable and ambiguous partner. But the Black Sea also means Ukraine and Georgia, and that's where the United States is looking at, and that's where we, with our effort and our lessons learned from Romania, should focus our cooperation as well in order to increase in real terms Black Sea security.
But can I ask you, Yulia, about, because, you know, the more we discuss the Black Sea and Ukraine and Georgia and Turkey, there is one common thread to all of these. There is one common element, and that is Russia, and how we look at Russia and the threats that are coming from Russia. And this is the year when I think for the first time the new Romanian national security strategy actually explicitly says that Russia is a threat, and it very much looks at Romania's security situation from the perspective of making sure that we can confront threats that are coming from Russia. And just as we did that, I think a few weeks later, after its publication, we had these two competing open letters to the Washington administration, both of them from signatories with significant experience with Russia. One of the letters was asking the Trump administration for, could we call it a new reset with Russia? Anyway, against the background of the idea that rather than pushing Russia in the arms of China and having to face a situation where we, the West, have to face bipolar Russian-Chinese world, we'd rather find ways of embracing Russia, trying to work with them in some shape or form, because it's China that's the really big danger. The other open letter, somehow in response to that, very much came from the perspective of those who got themselves burned on the first reset with Russia, and who were saying, not again. I mean, you know, let's not try this again. It doesn't work. You do not get to just be nice to Russia and work with it. And I'm curious if you can comment on where we stand from the perspective of Washington, and not only, do you feel that there's more and more of a push to somehow find overtures to Russia? So are we in Romania slightly anachronic in our own national security strategy? Or do you think this is just a phase, it's a debate, it's going to pass, not much is going to change?
Well, thank you for your very interesting question. You know, part of it to me is mind-boggling. There is not a matter of Russia versus China, or choosing one over the other and bringing one in the arms of another. I believe Russia has never been in our arms. I believe Russia is invading our territories every other year. And when it comes to China, This is why we are calling it here in the United States in Washington, D.C., the era of great power competition. So I think it's a matter from the Washington perspective, China in the long term is the biggest threat or the biggest threat perception. Hence, we've seen an increasingly aggressive rhetoric and increasingly aggressive measures because the undertext here has been that the United States, when it won the Cold War, has been too lenient when it comes to giving Russia and China access to capitalist markets that it created together with Europe in the West. That there was too much reset. That's kind of the mindset that is coming from here. And I would argue that there is no differentiation between China and Russia in the context of great power competition. Here in Washington, most people would argue that it's a matter of liberal democracies versus the rest. And the rest means China, Russia, and Iran. That's the list. So from this perspective, I don't know if it's going to be a matter of reset, whether we will see a second Trump administration or a Biden administration. None of the administrations will be in void. We've seen a much more aggressive and much more present United States during the Trump years on the eastern flank, to the extent that in countries like Poland and Romania, we've had sometimes even an increase in public opinion approval of the Trump term versus the previous Obama terms. So I think it's a matter of looking, no matter what the perspective, looking at Russia from the only angle that's possible, that we have in the West nothing to offer Russia in exchange in a possible negotiation or reset, as long as Russia is aggressing the West. And that is continuous. It's been in the 90s, it's been in more recently in the Black Sea in 2008, in 2014, in 2015, and 2018. So to me, the matter of a reset with Russia is a question of where would you actually start? And if you are starting from the territories that do not belong to Russia, where Russia is militarily present, there is not much, I think, from the Washington perspective of a premise for negotiation and reset.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Just to follow up somehow on the discussion, I think we are approaching, as you and I were discussing just a few days ago, the final phase of implementation of the Warsaw Summit agenda, and to a large extent, I think Romania has had quite a lot of achievements in the sense in terms of reshaping our focus on territorial defense rather than out-of-area operations and so on and so forth. But as we have been moving along with that, new threats are appearing every day. The list of actors that should be on should catch our attention is diversifying. Yeah. Exactly. Potentially, with the UK leaving the European Union, the list of partners that Romania might need to work even closer with is diversifying, because we've had very good cooperation with the UK. I'm sure we will continue to have it under the NATO umbrella, but not under the EU umbrella, as has been the case. So I'm wondering if there is any process of strategic planning or assessment at the level of the defense establishment as to the next 5 years or 10 years, and what kind of things we are looking at with priority.
Well, of course, as you would imagine, any military in the world would work with a planning process, a continuous planning process. This process never stops. We think in cycles. And we actually now planning for the next 5 years and the next 5 years after that. That's in general terms. But I would put into perspective, and I would start a little bit earlier with the Wales summit in 2014. It was right in the aftermath of the illegal annexation of Crimea, where the allies came together and recognized the need for a more robust defense posture of the alliance. And it was not a tremendous change, but it was an adaptation that was very agile and flexible and very much adapted in nature, that was able to, to respond, to send a very strong signal that the alliance is as cohesive as always. The measures that were actually envisioned then took place step by step. So we're actually not, right now we are not counting the achievements since the Warsaw Summit, but since the Wales Summit, because if you remember, and I'm sure you remember, right after the Wales Summit, it was established a so-called enhanced presence of the alliance on the eastern flank. It was planned and dealt with taking into consideration the northern part of this flank and the southern part of this flank with different measures adapted to the reality of the region. And we have witnessed the establishment of some core NATO structures in Romania for the first time since we became a NATO member. We have established right after 2014 the NATO Force Integration Unit. Then we have seen the multinational brigade in Craiova. Then headquarters multinational division in Bucharest followed. And after Warsaw, I'm very proud to remind of this. Right this year, not 2 months ago, not very long ago, we have actually came officially with the establishment of the multinational core southeast in Sibiu. So all this is an evolution, is a very logical and well-planned evolution of a structure that will help us to enable this new posture that the alliance is considering and is actually actively implementing on the eastern flank. So there's nothing left on the spur of the moment. There's a very thorough and very thoughtful process that is debated, discussed among the allies. And of course, there's always the national side of this aspect. I would like to add a little bit on something that Julia mentioned from the Washington perspective. Romania has always understood its role. As a NATO member, it was not a free rider. I mean, it didn't mean that we have succeeded to join NATO and that's it. You have noticed that speaking about the defense, the armed forces have continuously developed and modernized and implemented new, let's say, acquisition programs that will allow us to better tackle on the challenges. But it's not all about technology. It's also about getting ready every day to meet these challenges. So we are training better, we're training more, we have more exercises. And just one more point about the Russian Federation. You have mentioned the national strategy. I don't think the strategy identifies Russia itself as a threat, but the Russian actions in the Black Sea region. It's a difference that is very important in nature. And I think we are in an academic environment. I would challenge you to try to explain together why is that important to consider the Russians' action in the Black Sea region as being a threat for the European and Euro-Atlantic security. And in my opinion, this is very simple. The Black Sea region is, as Julia mentioned, is the link between two wider spaces, Asia and Europe. So it's very important to have here in this region a very stable and predictable environment where there's a free flow of resources, of ideas, of cooperation. And whenever there's a threat to this stability, then you have to take it very serious into consideration. And actually, this is what Russia does through Crimea. It tries to impose itself as a regional actor, as a hegemon. They try to impose what we call in technical terms A2AD, area denial. So in simpler terms, it tries to control the access to these resources. So yes, this is a threat to the regional security that it has to be taken into consideration. Therefore, it's of a strategic importance not only for NATO but also for European Union.
But let me raise something, and I think it's really, and I think this is fortunate, also for you as a representative, that defense is actually one area of government that's rarely challenged in terms of achievements and performance over the latest years. I think there's quite a lot of satisfaction among our partners, with Romania committing 2% of its GDP as per NATO rules. I think everybody acknowledges the role that Romania has played even before becoming NATO members in being a security provider and not a consumer. But let me raise, not preparedness, as you say, and training for the conflicts that are yet to come, but for the conflicts that are yet to come, and we might not even see them before they're here with us. And one of the things that I would want to ask you about is something we've acutely seen during these past few months, but they've been with us for years now. And I think they all revolve around the question, while we as, let's say, the establishment, the experts, the army are looking at the situation assessment and preparing for what is to come, are we going to have the population on our side should there be a conflict? Or are we in danger of losing support from the population because the likes of Russia, China, Iran, as Yulia pointed out, and others, and including sometimes allied powers like Turkey, increasingly have a destabilizing presence? And we've seen in a country like Romania, which has traditionally been so strongly pro-European, pro-NATO, pro-US, we have seen in multiple surveys so many narratives emerge which say, Romania is a colony of the West. We are being dictated things from Washington and Brussels. Why should we, even take the vaccine when one exists? Because this is, Bill Gates microchipping, controlling the population demographically, and so on and so forth. Other narratives that seem preposterous, but we have been studying public opinion during these past few months, and the degree to which they are believed by the population is extremely worrying across the region, not just in Romania. Things like the virus is made in a lab, whether in China or in the US, but it's also, the US version is just as present as the China version. This is, this is all part of a global plot that's with roots in both, the US and Brussels and all the places of power, and we're just being played. So what I'm trying to say is that there are so many signs that people are increasingly susceptible, not necessarily to pro-Russian or pro-Chinese narratives, but to anti-Western narratives, anti-NATO, anti-EU. We've been at Global Focus, we've been monitoring together with think tanks in another 16 regional countries throughout these months the evolution of disinformation. And the number one conclusion has been that the most toxic tactics, let's say, is to advance anti-EU narratives. Not so much anti-NATO, but very much anti-EU. So I wonder if, again, at the level of the defense establishment, are you aware of these things? And are you doing something, you know, hands-on, very active, and now to counter this? Because this is not a future projection. These are things that are happening right now. And as the song goes, I think it was something like, if, you know, the rough translation would be, if there's a war tomorrow, soldiers are going to check out the girl on page 5 in the newspaper. You might end up with the population, you know, saying, why would I go to war for partners in NATO or the EU when, you know, we have no direct interest and we're just being manipulated into this?
What a great question. Thank you for this. Yes, this is at the end of the day, this is the fundamental questions. These are the fundamental questions that we should ask. I would start my answer. I have many things to say. I could keep it like this until morning because this is my area of expertise. I'm running the Public Affairs Department in the Ministry of National Defense, which is part of the strategic communications efforts. You asked me at the beginning if I'm running the strategic, the Stratcom division or the public affairs. We are part of Stratcom, but we're not running the whole thing. Well, let me, I'll try to make just a few remarks because we still have some other topics. We have witnessed for the last 6 months something that we kind of knew, but we're not so much aware of. With this pandemic, we became acutely aware of the infodemic that followed. So everything was questioned, everything was subject to, you know, to mystification. We suddenly heard every day of the conspiracy theories, and we started to wonder, what is this all about? Do we do something to tackle this? Yes, every day. And I will give you some practical examples. At the beginning of the pandemic, we, at the Ministry of Defense, of course, we had to plan. We got our orders, our missions, and we knew exactly what we have to do to help the authorities because we were not the leading authority in dealing with the pandemic, but we had a supportive role. And of course, as any other military organization would do, you can imagine that it took a process of planning, of resources, and a mind-thinking process on that. And we, from the very beginning, we thought of how our people, our own personnel, would perceive this, the threat of the virus for themselves as individual beings, for the organization, for the military, and how can we keep them informed with the right information, with the right mix of information, and with the right settings, so they cannot be, they would not be diverted from their actual mission, but we keep them informed.
Did you have cases in the military of people who said, I don't believe in the virus, or I think this is, I don't know, manipulation, conspiracy, whatever?
I think in every part of the society, you would have believers and you would have skeptics. But we thought of having as few as possible. So we have started to develop our own internal information channels to keep them informed with the official information that was relevant to them. And we were actually, how should I say, shocked to see that the traffic of users on those internal channels, we have an internal network, tripled in just a week. And in time, from if we compare data with the beginning, we have like 7 to 8 more time people accessing those information. That it looks like a web page where we put information every day, and it's up to date. The key takeaway of this, yes, we can have answers to that. And the most important, in my opinion, the most important one is to invest time, resources, creativity into keeping people informed. A literacy process that is not very hard to set, but it's very important to do it every day and with a method and with a planning process. Can we expand that to at a population level? Yes. Is it easy? I don't think so, because...
Can we achieve geopolitical results? Can we, re-secure the commitment of our populations to NATO, to the European Union?
I will go back to lenses. Let's be very honest. 6 months ago, who would have thought we can have an event like this, in a setting like this? Nobody. Who would have thought that he or she would wash their hands 10 times a day, at least for 30 seconds, every time? Nobody. But we do this. Now it's internalized in our nature. We keep the masks, and we don't, say, no, it's too much for me. So why we did that? Because we saw that this is the only way. The only way to fight, to protect ourselves against this virus. So I think this could be a case study for many other scenarios, and this could be included. How can we protect our own population? Because you're right, at the end of the day, we might have the best equipment, we might have enough resources, but if our people don't think that we are doing the right thing for them, we might not have won the struggle and the battle.
Yulia, since you're in Washington, I don't need to go through all the ways in which Washington is experiencing these days rock bottom in many ways of post-truth and disinformation and so on and so forth. And unlike this region, where perhaps once we became EU and NATO members, we forgot to a certain extent that these were things that needed repeating, that democracy is something that needs to be cultivated every day. The US is a country with a very strong democratic tradition, a country where students in public schools start their day singing the national anthem. So there are values that have been cultivated now for hundreds of years, and still we see QAnon and we see so many, so much public acceptance of not just half-truths, but of blatant lies. Would you consider, not just about, for the US, but for our region as well, would you think this is one important tactical area of operations in the future? Do you feel this is something that needs attention right now, and it's urgent and it's stringent? Or is this, by comparison with other threats, including cyber, not just conventional ones, but, just cyber threats, for instance, or terrorism? Are these things secondary, and we're just overreacting because, well, it's something that we understand better than guns and tanks?
Thank you, Oana, for your question. I think everybody feels like information warfare is a main component of future warfare, and is a main component now of current warfare. If we are to look at the pandemic and the disinformation campaign on that, it's hit both sides of the Atlantic, I would argue, just as hard. I remember the massive EU coverage of EU or within Europe media coverage of China helping instead of the United States at the start of the pandemic, and now Russia all over the Western media. Russia inventing the the vaccine, by the time we'll have a real vaccine from either the UK or the United States or both, where they're actually being developed, no one will believe that the vaccine is true, because already we diminished our trust in vaccines thanks to disinformation. And if you are to look at how cost efficient these weapons are of disinformation, and at the fact that as liberal democracies in the West, whether Romania or the United States, we cannot turn to disinformation to increase popular support or increase the public opinion with regard to our country. We do have leaders that use this information as a weapon as well, but we cannot use it as countries in our foreign policy because of our regime. So you see how vulnerable we are as a whole Western society, whether it's a matter of the virus or something else, whether it's a matter of Washington or Bucharest. The example that you heard me say, I think already a few times, but I still think even now in the context of Corona, it's the most valid, which shows you that disinformation is so powerful, is going back to hard security, your question, and the perception and the lens through which we look at it. If you look at the ballistic missile defense that we host in Romania as a NATO-US capability, when the Romania decided to make the offer and host this component of the ballistic missile defense, it was perceived, and you see that in public opinion polls, as something that was guaranteeing for the majority of the population security. Whether it's China or Iran or Russia, ballistic missile defense, officially against Iran, right, made Romanians, the majority, feel safe. But then you have disinformation with threats renewed from Moscow that this increases, that the fact that Romania is a host increases its insecurity and increases the chances for an attack from Russia. When you now Google ballistic missile defense, these words in Romanian, you will see the first few pages of just Russian disinformation of how ballistic missile defense is a threat to Romanian national security. And the effect of that you see in the new opinion polls 5-6 years later after they were initially conducted, that that not anymore the majority of Romanians believe it's a security guarantee, but rather many believe that it's much more than initially. Many more than initially believe that it's a vulnerability. The same effect you have everywhere across the West, and you have here massively in the United States. And it shows you how the United States, a superpower that has the same GDP as the European Union, but far less population. So incredibly powerful in economic terms, in military terms, can be hit so hard by disinformation, whether it's being propagated from other countries, China, Russia, etc., or it's being propagated here at home in the United States. We see how vulnerable we are, and that this, with the cost efficiency of how cheap it is, right, to launch this information successfully. We definitely have to continue our focus on that if we are to look at international security, because I think the majority of us believe that this will be a main part of security and of the necessity for defense in the next few years in terms of international security.
Thank you very much, Julia. I know you have to go into another meeting, I assume online, as most meetings are these days, and thank you for doing the same with us and joining us from such a distance. The good thing about how widespread Zoom and WebEx and so on have become is that everybody has by now become so familiar with discussing across continents. So it's been good having you with us from such a distance, and hope to have you in Râșnov next year in person. Thank you very much. And with that, I would still have many more questions, but I want to open this up to the audience as well. So You know, if there is anything that you would like to ask Colonel Spînu, please just use the microphone over there and don't hesitate. So if, please.
Thank you. So there has been the question asked if there were any skeptics about the coronavirus in the army. I'm a senior year medical student, and even in the medical field, there are specialists and doctors who appeared coronavirus skeptics. And I would like to ask the questions, as the department you lead is about, or you're part of, is about informing and publicity. What are the key elements when we have so many skeptics and so many fake news and information that confuse the people? What are the key elements that should be taken into consideration when communicating and when wanting to spread some correct scientific information to the public? Because I'm sure you faced the same challenges as medical professionals, or even many more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Are we answering every question?
I think so. Yeah, why not?
Well, thank you for the question. It is very interesting. First of all, I must state as clear as I can, we cannot measure and we do not poll among the military personnel who is skeptic or who's not. But in any time and then, I have seen from my personal friends list, because I'm also on Facebook, some you know, distribution of these. You all know this kind of news, of this conspiracy theory postings that we see on social media. And from time to time, because I have many friends on my Facebook friends list that I know them in person, I replied immediately, "Do you really believe in this?" And he was like, in what? Well, what did I do? You just shared that information, and I was just interested if it represents your opinion or not. Oh, no, it was just something that I thought it's interesting, and I just, you know, resend it. So, and many times it's like this. We don't take enough time to analyze what we're being fed, and we think it's nice, and we resend it. Every one of us has committed this sin from time to time. So I don't think we should go after every one of them. But yes, at an institutional level, we take this very seriously, and we have developed, even before the pandemic, we have started this pretty much when we decided to expand our communication channels on social media, and that was 2012. When we have launched our first Facebook page, the Ministry of National Defense Facebook page, we thought from the very beginning that we would have to have a social media literacy system program. So what we did in the first 2 or 3 years after launching the Ministry of National Defense social media platform was to tour major units, military high schools, military universities, to present to the people what's the advantage of using social media, which are the threats and the don'ts that they have to take into consideration. And we have updated this program every year. So if you would like me to give you some advice how to spot very easily a fake news, I can do it very easily. There's no rocket science in recognizing a fake news or a disinformation piece of material. It will take more than not more than 5 minutes on Google to try to look for some alternative sources to verify that information. Usually there are clear marks that information is fabricated. You can spot grammar errors. You can spot information that is clearly not true. So for the last 6 months, we have focused, all of us, on medical issues, but this is nothing new, to be honest. This information was here long before social media developed, and I'm sure that it is here to stay for as long as we will be social beings. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. It is very difficult to look at you because of the sun, but if there's anything else you would like to follow up on that, I will be happy to answer.
Well, just I have a quick follow-up question, which is because yesterday we had a discussion that was titled exactly like that, infodemic pandemic, and we discussed with civil society representatives and not only, and the overall conclusion was that obviously it might be easier to spot the manipulation than to fight it.
Yes.
One of the reasons I think is also you rightly pointed out that one of the key elements is that we need to be there. We need to be communicating first before others can do it for us and shape the narrative in ways that we would not want them to be shaped. But as Vlad Miksic, one of the speakers of yesterday, was pointing out, nobody has invested a lot of resources into medical experts or communication experts who can actually do this efficiently at the level of the public authorities. And I was wondering, obviously the military has the benefit of being a hierarchical structure, a closed structure, so you have more or less of a captive audience and you have channels to address them. But I wonder if, from your experience of crisis management and of resilience, and resilience is one key element that's built also in the NATO framework and EU framework, do you think there are lessons that can be transferred to the civilian arena? And is there any ongoing effort that you know of to communicate with civilian authorities and to coordinate with civilian authorities perhaps to take into account this massive influx of disinformation, which might not be new, but the scale and the speed at which it's spreading is really putting pressure, on health resources, on the economy, and so on?
Well, first of all, let me make this observation. In the online environment, there is no difference between civilian and military environment. We are all part of the same ecosystem, so the threats are equal to all of us. But in the military realm, as I mentioned before, we tend to think everything through a planning process, through a thorough analysis process. So being a hierarchical organization is not always an advantage, because time is of essence in terms of this information, and you have to react if there is a need for a reaction as quick as possible. And you can imagine if you would have to follow every level of authority, by the time you've got the formal stamped approval, the information is no longer relevant. So we had to adapt our procedures to be able to respond to this in a timely manner. And we did have some instances, even in the coronavirus time frame, when we had to respond as an institution to some disinformation actions in real time. I'm not sure if you remember, there were, at the beginning of the pandemic in Romania, there were some rumors that the military would close Bucharest, because there were some videos taken on the roads with some trucks and military equipment moving, and they said this is what they are hiding from us. They are going to close Bucharest. So we had to respond within less than 30 minutes since the original the original information was posted online, because otherwise we would have lost the momentum. We had another instance when it was a warning that the Air Force would spread chemicals in Bucharest and other major cities in Romania, and people were advised to stay indoors. It was very clever crafted, that information. So yes, we have to have a mechanism. First of all, how to detect in time this. This is the main challenge. How to make the difference, which is, you know, honest misinformation, you know, lack of knowledge, and which one is weaponized, which one has a malign intent in the background, and how to make that difference. And I think this is the key. These are the key areas where we have to develop robust procedures and robust mechanisms at national level. I have to be honest, I don't think we have something like that yet at the national level. But with this kind of approach from the defense side, and there are some other institutions and also in the academic environment that have developed strategies and platforms, I think we will get there at one point in the future.
You mentioned the misinformation about closing down Bucharest, but that reminded me how after the first emergency ordinance, was it? I think it was after the first one. The army was out in the streets of Bucharest. Yeah. And that was very controversial. That sparked a few days of social media debate, intense social media debate as to, you know, from why are they taking out the tanks? What is this, civil war? You know, why do they take out the army against their own citizens? This is the government that's, you know, trying to control us, and these are authoritarian practices and so on, to obviously the others who were saying this is the only way to keep people indoors, to make sure that people are observant of security measures and so on. How do you assess that measure now? I mean, and do you have any sort of assessment of whether that was rather a good move, strictly speaking from the point of view of PR, let's say, and image, yeah, or do you feel that was perhaps not the best idea?
Well, looking backwards, it's not 6 months, I think it's 4 months now. I have to say I'm very proud of my team. We have thought of this because we knew that this is coming. We knew that this was preparing, and we knew that the military would be tasked to assist the law enforcement structures in enforcing the state of emergency measures. And we were very careful from the beginning how to inform the public about this. Of course, we realized from the beginning that we would not be able to answer any comment, any negative comment that would come out after the military would be on the streets. But our strategy was to keep a steady and continuous flux of information to the public. So we were the first one to put information on the market. We were the first one to inform them. That is a hybrid attack, right? We were the first one to inform the media, hey, if you want to see the military, that they would start, when we had the first day with the military on the streets, we actually informed the media where to place themselves and see the military. We were able to accommodate any request from media to, you know, to join, to follow the military personnel that were patrolling on the streets, to interview them. We encouraged media to interact with our people in order to see that that was nothing more than just a patrolling mission.
Were they responsive? I mean, did you feel that you worked well with the media?
We did not leave that on, by chance. We empowered our public affairs officers to speak with their personnel and to encourage them to interact with the media, to explain in plain terms, in simple terms, what they are doing, why they are on the streets. We explain through the public affairs officers what is their role on the street. They were there to help, to assist, and to expand the possibility of law enforcement forces to do other missions. So we kind of help them to take care of many more missions that they were not able to take care of should we not be on the streets with them. So I think it went very well. We planned from the beginning to have a very robust information plan, and we stuck to the plan, and it went very well.
Okay. Any other questions as we are preparing to close today's discussion? So if anybody else wants to ask a question, then better do it now. If no further questions, then I mean, you know, I'm sure there are actually a zillion questions that we could have, especially around this, and I'm sure as this is going to continue to unfold, unfortunately, and the epidemic is still with us for the foreseeable future. I will remain very curious as to how you will be dealing with it, and again, hopefully there will be more communication and coordination between public authorities on the civilian side and on the military side, because I see many areas of overlap and many areas where it would make sense to discuss precisely because you do things differently, and because the modus operandi is different in the civilian sphere and the military one. But thank you very much for sharing your experience so far and your assessment of where we stand in terms of the strategic and security agenda. Thank you very much, Ambassador, once again for being with us today, and hopefully next year in Râșnov we're going to be able to have a full-fledged festival with a full-fledged debate, and you're going to be with us again on stage. Looking forward to that. And obviously I'm happy we had Julia with us, even though she had to go early. Thank you for the 2 days of very interesting discussions that were powered by the Global Focus Center, and to our entire team of colleagues, collaborators, and guests who came all the way to Râșnov with us to be with you. And very much looking forward to having this in less interesting times, perhaps, but because I'm sure the debates will still be interesting next year. Thank you very much, and have a good evening, everyone.